Okay, so today we're going to, Mit Hashem, finish Maseches Avodah Zarah b'Shar Tov Mutzlachas. There's a big thrill and a schus to learn together with you, Zev. So we're up to Perek Hey, Mishnah Yud Aleph. Before we learn the Mishnah inside, a word of introduction. In the time of the Mishnah, in Mishnaic times, a coating of pitch, a coating of tar was smeared on the walls of a wine press in order to seal it. What today would be cement, in those days was tar that sealed all the cracks in the wall in order to make sure that the wine can't seep out. Now, since the pitch has a strong odor, a connection to this past week's Pasha Shmois, where Moshe was placed in the Nile and his bassinet was smeared with zephes. So Rashi comments on it that it was smeared on the outside so that he should not smell it. But anyway, since pitch has a strong odor that could ruin the flavor of the wine, it was common that a small amount of wine was smeared on the coating after it was applied in order to reduce the effect of the smell. So this obviously creates a problem for us. This creates a problem where an Avodah Zarah, where an idolater was the one who coated the wine press. And since the wine that he used was forbidden as yain nesech, we therefore have a problem. What happens now to this wine press? Now, this had no contact as yet with the actual wine that was going to go through the wine press. But the issue is, what happens to this yain nesech that is on the outside of the wine press? So the Mishnah teaches us how to resolve this issue, how to deal with this problem. What should be done in such a case to make the wine press completely usable lechatchila for our kosher wine? Says the Mishnah, Gas shel even shezif soivet kachovim. If an idolater coated a stone wine press that belonged, versteht to a Jew, an idolater coated the wine press that was made out of stone with pitch, and then he smeared it with wine, in which case we of course also must assume that he rubbed the yain nesech onto the coating. And the Rav explains to us in practical terms why that is so. Shezaf so'evet kachovim urcha lemirmei bechamra purta la'abure dezifsas. The reason the wine was smeared was in order to lessen the effect of the odor of the zephes, of the pitch, of the tar. So if this wine press is made out of stone, it's made out of stone, what do? Says the Mishnah, Menagva v'hitoira. All that needs to be done is that the Jew may wash and dry it, and it is then considered cleansed lechatchila from any forbidden wine. The wine press may now be used to produce kosher wine. Favos, because since the wine press is made of stone, it does not absorb, it is not boleya, it does not absorb the what? The wine in the pitch. And therefore it is enough to remove the wine from the coating by washing it and drying it. That is when the wine press is made of stone. Easy solution. What about Veshel Eitz, says the Mishnah? If the wine press is made out of wood, Rebbe says, Yenagev. He should wash and dry the wood to cleanse it, just as he did with a stone wine press, because the wooden walls of the press also, according to Rebbe, do not absorb the wine. But Chachamim are machmir. But Chachamim oimrim yikloif es hazefes. He should be koilif. He should peel off. He must first remove the coating of the pitch, and then wash and dry the surface of the wine press. To understand, a wooden wine press requires a thicker coating of pitch than that which is made out of stone. Now, since this thicker coating absorbs more wine, by nature of it being thicker, it takes in more, it seeps in more. So the Chachamim hold that washing and drying alone cannot completely cleanse the press from the Yain Nesech. Now the Chachamim agree with Rebbe that wooden materials do not absorb wine. Their concern is not with the wooden coating of the wine press, but their concern is with the coating. Now, since there is a greater amount of wine in the thicker coating of a wooden wine press, it cannot be completely removed by washing and drying, and it could very well be that some of the wine will seep in to the permitted wine. And therefore, the Chachamim insist that the coating must be removed. And even then, the wooden walls of the press must be washed and dried because of the concern that some of the wine has seeped through the coating onto the walls of the press. And therefore the Chachamim say, Yikloif es hazefes. You have to be koilif it, you have to remove it. Likloif also means to peel off in modern Hebrew. And then finally there's one last case, and the one last case is the most serious. What if the wine press is made out of cheres? If the wine press is made out of earthenware. Now earthenware has its own unique characteristics and halachos in terms of kashering, etc. So therefore, says the Mishnah, V'shel cheres, af al pi shekolaf es hazefes, even if he completely removed the coating of the pitch, the coating of the tar, arei zu asur, it remains asur. Why is that so? Because the nature of earthenware is to be highly absorbent, and it must be assumed that the forbidden wine was absorbed not only into the coating of the pitch, but also into the earthenware walls of the wine press itself. And therefore the press itself is therefore also for use even after the coating of the pitch has been removed. Even after the coating of the pitch has been removed. Now the only way is to elaborate on this important halacha. The only way to cleanse an earthenware wine press is to fill it with water and let it soak for 24 hours. And then remove the water and fill it with fresh water and let it soak for another 24 hours. And this process is then repeated again a third time. After 3 24-hour periods have passed, then this earthenware wine press will be mutar, will be permitted to be used. And when the press is cleaned in this way, there is no need to first remove the pitch coating, as long as the press has not yet been used to produce wine. So, as far as the as far as the cheres itself is concerned, it's also. But if you go through this 3-time process, it can become mutar. And now we come to the last Mishnah of Maseches Avodah Zarah, which is a Mishnah which is really the foundation of all the basic principles of koshering. Basic principles of koshering we find here. Let's see. The previous Mishnah discussed the process for purifying a wine press that absorbed forbidden wine. So this Mishnah now teaches us what must be done to permit food utensils, kelim. We're not talking now about wine press. We're finished with the wine press. We're now talking about kelim that were bought from an Avodah Zarah, kelim that were bought from a goy. How can they now be used by a Jew? When we say that the Mishnah teaches us about kelim, we're talking about pots and grills and dishes and silverware. Now the Mishnah basically is speaking about metal utensils or earthenware utensils that are coated with lead, which is a metal, or glass utensils. Now, there are two issues involved in making such kelim permitted for use. Any keli, any utensil that was owned by a goy, that was owned by an idolater, must be immersed in a mikveh, tfilas kelim, before it can be used by a Jew to consume food, before they can be used for eating from. Again, any utensil that was owned by a goy must be immersed in a mikveh before it can be used by a Jew for food. This applies both to new kelim that have previously not been used in any way, shape, or form, not for kosher, not for non-kosher. Any keli that is bought from a goy must be immersed in a mikveh, as well as for used ones. Any keli that is bought from a Jew must be, any keli that is bought from a non-Jew must be immersed in a mikveh. That's tfilas kelim, which we learn from the root of the halacha is in Devorim, in Bamidbar, Perek Lamed Aleph, where the Pasuk makes clear that it applies only to metal or metal-coated utensils, and midrabanan to glass as well. Now, additionally, if a kli, was used for hot, non-kosher food, so we assume, the halacha assumes in your idea, that the flavor of the non-kosher food that the utensil absorbed must be removed before it can be used for kosher food. So our Mishnah is going to deal with the procedures for dealing with both of these issues in regard to any and all kinds of kelim. Now, we also have a klal that we should mention before we go to the Mishnah itself. When non-kosher food is heated in a utensil, some of the flavor, some of the tam becomes absorbed, is nivla, blia, it's a blia, becomes absorbed, livloya, right? Livloya, the verb in Hebrew means to swallow. So the flavor becomes swallowed into, it becomes absorbed into the walls of the kli. Now, if this utensil, if this kli is then used to cook kosher food, so the non-kosher flavor comes out and mixes with the kosher food, causing it therefore to become asur. And therefore the flavors of the forbidden food must be removed from the walls of the utensil before it can be used for kosher food. This most basic halacha of Yeridea is taught in the Torah in connection with the utensils that were captured by Bnei Israel in their war with Midian. In Bamidbar, Perek Lamed Aleph. It applies, however, not only to utensils that belong to a goy, but even to Jewish-owned kelim in which non-kosher food was mistakenly cooked. To kasher a keli, to remove from a keli a blia of isu. To remove from a keli a blia of isu. Any blia, anything that was absorbed into the keli which is forbidden to be used. So now the Mishnah gives us the specifics. If someone buys utensils used for food from a goyim, from idolaters, he must purify them, he must kasher them in the following way. And here the Mishnah gives us these klolim. These are the klolim of basic kashering. If a utensil is customarily, if a utensil that is customarily needs only immersion, only tvila in a mikveh, because it has not absorbed any forbidden flavor, you should immerse it in a mikveh, and you may then use it. That means to say that the kli that we're talking about, that we're going to immerse in a mikveh in tvilas kelim, has not been used for any isur. It's not that it got mixed up, fleishiks and milchiks together. It's not that he put in a non-kosher flavor. No. The utensil is customarily going to be used in a kosher way. It has not yet been used in a non-kosher way. Go ahead and teufel it. A utensil that is generally used only for cold foods and drink does not need to have anything done to it before it is immersed in a mikveh. Now, since generally no absorption can take place without the food being heated, so a utensil used only for cold foods does not absorb any dvar iso, does not absorb any prohibited matters in its walls. However, if the utensil has any food stuck to it, it must be removed before it is immersed. So, first we start with the simple. How about, says the Mishnah Vaita, lahagil yagil? If this utensil that customarily needs purging with hot water, that's called hag'olah, lahagil, the verb. If a kli that customarily needs purging with hot water to take out the flavor it absorbed, he should first purge it with hot water and then immerse it in a mikveh to permit it for use. First he needs to kasher it, then he needs to be toivel in a mikveh. What does this refer to? It refers to kelim, such as metal pots used for cooking. These must be placed, how to kasher them? These must be placed in boiling water to remove their forbidden flavors. Before doing so, they must be scrubbed well to remove all dirt or all rust from the surfaces, since any forbidden flavors absorbed into the walls of the utensil cannot be effectively removed unless the utensils are absolutely clean. Now, removing absorbed flavors from a kli by placing it in hot water, that's called purging. In halachic category, it's called hag'olah. And the general rule for removing absorbed flavors is that the flavor comes out, the forbidden flavor, the osodika flavor, comes out the same way it went in. That is the very important principle in Yoredeya. Keboloi kach poltoi. Keboloi kach poltoi. The way it went in, that's the way it comes out. So it went in with hot water, it comes out with hot water. Came in with fire, goes out with hot fire. So since flavors enter the walls of a cooking pot through hot liquid in which the food is cooking, they must likewise be removed by cooking them in hot water, by koshering them in hot water. So that was the next. Lahagil yagil. Lelabin ba'ur, yilabin ba'ur. If a utensil customarily needs heating in a flame, libun, to remove any flavor absorbed in it, you should first heat it in a flame and then immerse it in a mikvah to permit it for use. Okay, what does this refer to? This refers to metal utensils that are used for roasting the food directly on the fire. Now, flavor that enters the walls of a utensil directly through the heat of a fire without any liquid, is more difficult to remove than flavor absorbed through a hot liquid, that is, through cooking. And therefore, it cannot be removed simply by boiling it in water. It must therefore be burnt out directly by the heat of a fire, and therefore this is what is known as libun. How do you do libun? The utensil must be held in the flame until you see sparks flying from it. Now, where libun is performed, the surface of the utensil need not be cleaned first, as we said previously, by boiling and so forth, because here we assume that the fire burns everything off. The strength and intensity of the fire burns everything off. And then the Mishnah says, I'll give you two examples of what we're talking about directly on the fire. Lelabin ba'ur. The Mishnah says, I'll give you two examples. Ashvud ve'askola. A spit that's used for roasting, or a grill. Melabin ba'ur. He must heat in a flame before immersing them into a mikveh. Right? So the obvious example in our day and age would be a grill. Certainly a small grill. A big grill to kosher is not simple, unless you, again, as I said, use the fire over it carefully, every little piece of it. It's a big job. And then finally, the last piece of the Mishnah is about a knife. A knife used for non-kosher food has a unique form of cleansing because it has a unique form of use in halachic categories. Hasakin, if someone buys a knife from a goy, from an idolater, says the Mishnah, what do you do in order if you want to make it kosher? Shafa v'hita oira. He scrubs it by sticking it into a hard ground, and it's te'oira. Te'oira means it's permissible to be used. It doesn't mean toho, like betum of a taira. Toho means it can be used now. It's kosher. Let's understand. What does that mean? Shafa. You're shafit. You're scrubbing it, and then it can be used. Scrubbing. Now, first of all, knives in and of themselves are considered in a category by themselves because they're treated with greater strictness than other kelim that are used for cold food, because the pressure of the blade against the food as it cuts causes a certain amount of absorption of belia into the knife. and from the knife, then into the food. The knives often have grease clinging to the surface of the blade. Now, scrubbing is therefore accomplished by pushing the knife into a hard earth 10 times, each time in a different spot. And this removes any grease that is stuck to the surface of the blade and anything that might come out of the knife as a result of the knife pressing against the food as it cuts it. And therefore, it permits the knife to be used with cold food. Alternatively, just to finish it up, alternatively, the knife can be scraped with a whetstone, a stone used for sharpening knives, which permits it to be used even with hot food, says the Rav. And it must then be immersed in a mikveh. And one last point that I want to make is that a knife can be made kosher by scrubbing only if the blade is smooth and not pocked or poked with little holes. But if the surface of the knife is not smooth, it must be heated in a flame with libun in order to become mutar, says the Rav. Okay. Hadron Alach Maseches Avodah Zarah. Mazel Tov on completing another Masechta together.